Hi, my name is Linda Pohly. I'm on the music history faculty at Ball State University, and today I'm talking with Patricia Tretick, who is Professor Emerita from the School of Music at Ball State and also is a continuing member of the Muncie Symphony Orchestra as a violinist. Welcome, Pat. I'm happy to get a chance to visit with you today. We thought we might begin by asking you to talk about your instrument a little bit. We always know that, especially with stringed instruments, there can be very interesting historical background for the instrument.
Yes, I'm very proud to have this instrument. I've had it many years. It happens to be an old Italian instrument made during the great golden age of violin making, which roughly corresponds to the Baroque era.
Yes. Mm-hmm.
And although it's not a Stradivarius, everyone knows that name, it still is, it's a Galliano, Ferdinand Galliano, and it was made about 1760.
1760.
Which, if you think about that date, that's when Mozart was maybe 4 or 5 years old.
Absolutely, absolutely. That's
shortly
interesting.
after Bach's death.
Mm-hmm.
And so I treasure this greatly.
Yeah, it's a beautiful instrument.
I have a fine bow, a French bow. Most of the great bows happen to be French rather than Italian.
Yeah, that is, I've always found that interesting, that the instruments themselves are usually Italian background, but that the bows usually are French background. That is interesting.
Even today, the modern Italian instruments are very much prized and in great demand.
Is that right?
The 20th century Italian instruments
makes
right? them more valuable than any other.
Mm-hmm. Good, good. Well, one of the reasons, as you know, that I wanted to visit with you, trying to make some connections for our students between the past and the present. We all learn about the Bach family and other families in music history, but people might be interested to know that we have a very active musical family with Muncie roots, and that is your family, the Tretick family. And so I wondered if perhaps we could begin by asking you to mention the members of your family and briefly what they're involved with at this point, and then we'll go back and talk about some other things.
I have 5 children. They are all professional musicians.
Mm-hmm.
The oldest is Stephanie. She's been a member of the Baltimore Symphony and for the last 12 years a member of the Pittsburgh Symphony. She's performs on both violin and viola.
Both instruments?
Presently on viola in the Pittsburgh Symphony. Blythe, my second daughter, is co-principal of the Phoenix Symphony on cello. She has been in the past a member of the St. Paul Chamber Orchestra. She was principal of the Grand Rapids Symphony in Michigan and also in Tampa of the Gulf Coast Orchestra. She was principal cellist. Clifford, my oldest son, is a fine flutist, and for a while he concertized, but found that it was a hard life.
Mm-hmm.
So he is now making flutes in Boston for the Brannan flute makers, and he's also plays quite often.
Mm-hmm. So he broke out of the family mold a little bit in being a wind player. Mm-hmm.
Yes, indeed he did. He wanted to do something different.
I see. Mm-hmm.
Different from what his father and mother did.
Sure.
In the way of an instrument. Noelle plays in Indianapolis with the Indianapolis Symphony, with the Chamber Orchestra. She's very active and records. She travels with people like Andy Williams and Natalie Cole and does that sort of thing as well. And my youngest son is Drew, who also broke out of the mold in a certain sense after his 2 degrees at Juilliard. He decided that he wanted to, he was interested in electronic music. So he combined his performance on viola with that of the Zeta violin, which at that time, this is several years ago, was just being manufactured in California. And he was the first person to give a fully electronic recital at Juilliard.
At Juilliard, yeah.
They now have a division of electronic music there.
I see. And a Zeta violin is a hard body electric violin.
Yes,
is that correct?
Yes, with 5 strings. Which combines violin and viola.
I see. Yes. As a matter of fact, at Ball State, we do have a copy of a video that he has made about that instrument that is really very interesting. Earlier, you were telling me an interesting story about Noelle's name. Do you want to mention that just briefly?
Well, she's born on Christmas.
She was born on Christmas, but her official name really isn't Noel, is that
No,
right?
that's
and,
right.
And so that's just the name that she has,
Yes,
has picked up.
She has.
Sure, sure. And a little bit about your husband.
Sidney Tretick was a child prodigy, and he was a remarkable violinist, and for 10 years he was head of the violin department at Ball State.
I see.
He was also a composer, but I think most of the really innate talent in our children probably comes through his genes.
Absolutely.
He's a very fine violinist.
And he passed away in 1962.
Yes. When our oldest child was 11 and the youngest was 5 months.
Wow, yeah, yeah, okay. Well, tell me about music in your family in terms of the activity. We've heard what your various children are doing now, but during their growing up years, what was the philosophy or the attitude about music and about their training?
Well, let's say that each one was more or less propelled into the world of music at birth. They weren't, music was certainly not imposed upon them, because music was really the expression of our lives, my husband and mine. So they were expected to play and assumed they would play, and they did. Now that doesn't mean that the impulse was there to practice.
Right. Yes.
And that's a very large part of any skill.
Indeed.
One has to learn the discipline of practice. But each one did in time choose an instrument, and I said they went to music and art schools during their high school years, which gave them time for practice and a chance to hear other students. Talented students.
Sure. I know that a couple of your daughters went to the Interlochen Music Camp up in Michigan.
Not the camp, the academy.
The academy, I'm sorry.
Yes, the older two attended the Interlochen Music Academy, and the younger three attended the North Carolina School of the Arts in Winston-Salem.
I see. So some fine training even
so
when
they
yeah.
had good training.
Sure. What about even when they were little, before they got to the high school age? What was the family schedule and such?
Well, of course, they heard string quartet practicing in our living room.
Sure.
And
Yeah.
they attended our musical, the Ars Musica string quartet concerts and the Muncie Symphony concerts. And they had good training with teachers at Ball State.
Good.
Salvatore Celipini, who is now in the Pittsburgh Symphony, was Bly's first cello teacher, for instance. And Alfio Pignati, who was in our string quartet and then went to the Interlochen Arts Academy, was Stephanie's violin teacher. So they had early training, and of course my husband and I more or less started them.
I see. I believe you mentioned to me one time that sometimes in the morning you held them back from going to school until they got their practicing done in the morning.
That happened on occasion. If they hadn't practiced, they stayed home until the practicing was done. Then it could go to school.
I see. That's very interesting. So, well, we've heard about the children, and certainly some fine teachers and some fine schools are represented, and as a matter of fact, they're also working currently in some fine musical organizations. Let's talk a little bit more about your husband. How did the two of you meet?
Cindy and I met in Phoenix. I had gone there to teach. After having played 4 years in the Denver Symphony, I decided that in those days the remuneration for playing with an orchestra was very, very small, and one simply couldn't live on it. So I decided, since I was registered as a teacher and had the training, I would look for a teaching position, and received one in Phoenix. And my husband, who wasn't my husband at that time, Sidney was there as concertmaster and associate conductor of the Phoenix Symphony.
I see.
He was also teaching in Phoenix College. So that year we became acquainted, and we were married the following April. Then he decided to look for a teaching position because he had concertized on the Community Artist Series, which was rather popular in those days. But he decided if we had a family, he wanted a steady position. So we went to Kansas, taught there for a year.
Is that right?
Salina, and Kansas Wesleyan. Then we came here in 1952,
To Ball State.
Ball State, and
I see.
he was here until his death.
Mm-hmm.
But that summer that we met, he was also, in fact, the summer we were married, he played a Carnegie Hall recital.
Oh, wow. Mm-hmm.
And so he still concertized, and he played with many orchestras in this region
Absolutely.
as soloist.
I see. Okay. And so then the two of you would also, in addition to having your home life together, you had a professional life together that you would perform in the
yes,
same
yeah.
ensembles and large
Absolutely.
ensembles and chamber music groups as well?
While we were here and
yes.
elsewhere, of course.
I see. Now, a few moments ago, you mentioned that the earliest training for your children with regard to music was the responsibility of you and of your husband. How did that work out, having mom and dad also being the teachers?
Not very well.
Yeah.
It depends from child to child. One was not receptive, another one would be somewhat.
Yeah.
But it was best when we had outside teachers
Sure.
for them.
I think a lot of people probably
Yes.
find that. So,
Yes.
okay. Well, in trying to make some connections again with the Bach family with regard to music history, we have talked mostly about the performance training and activities of your family. Are there composers and teachers? Now, I realize that both you and your husband had done some teaching, but particularly with your children in teaching or composition.
Sidney was a composer, and as I said, and he wrote a number of pieces for the violin, which have been played, and he wrote a concerto shortly before his death, which he performed and has subsequently been performed by Stephanie.
Well, how nice.
With Muncie Symphony, with the Marion Symphony, and also with the Pittsburgh Symphony.
Is that right?
Yes.
What a nice legacy for the father to leave for the
Yes,
children. Yeah.
He would be pleased. Then Stephanie also has been composing some pedagogical materials for the violin, which have just been published this last month
I
by
see.
Ludwig Publishing Company. And the others, Drew does some composing for the Zeta instrument,
in connection
which he
with-
plays,
yes.
in connection with that. I think that's the only persons we have who are composers in the family.
I would assume that many of them do teaching. It seems
Oh,
in
yes,
this
yes.
day and age that many
do.
performers are also teachers.
They have all taught.
Yeah.
Noelle's taught at Anderson for 5 years at Anderson University, and Park Tutor in Indianapolis, which is a private school. Stephanie teaches at Chatham College in Pittsburgh. Clifford has taught. They've all taught.
Sure. And remind me, what year did you retire from Ball State? I should know that, and I don't recall it.
In 1993.
93. And you taught violin, but you also taught some Music History 100
Yes.
and had a variety of things in your teaching load.
I taught other music history courses
Is that
also,
right?
long before there was a department. Of musicology.
Sure.
Yes.
Okay. Well, let's move up to the present. When your family is able to get together these days, is music still a part of your gatherings?
Indeed it is, especially at Christmas when we are together. And that is the only time when we are able to gather the entire family. And for the past 3 years we've been in Phoenix.
At Christmas?
At Christmas time. And this year we'll have, since Noel is married now to a fine trumpet player, we'll have another instrument. I don't know how he'll fit in. But also the principal flutist of the Indianapolis Symphony is very much interested in my oldest son. They're interested in each other. So she will be with us. And so we'll have 2 flutes this year,
I see.
as well as our strings.
I see. So Muncie's loss is a gain for Phoenix, I guess, at Christmas time.
Well,
Yeah. What about other situations? Have there been cases where you have been able to perform as a family?
Yes. We performed, for instance, in Muncie with the Muncie Symphony in 1978 as a family.
1978. Wow.
And it was wonderful. It was a very exciting concert.
And I believe you mentioned that you did the Bach Brandenburg number 5, is
Yes,
that right?
because that
instrumentation.
instrumentation fits our family,
Sure.
except for the harpsichorist, whom we had to import.
Right.
And he's a
right.
close friend of the family, Nelson Pageant,
I see.
and a very fine pianist.
Yeah. Well, that's great that we can even make that connection. We're talking about the box with regard to family, and here, in fact, your family has performed some of his music. That's really kind of neat. Yeah. Now, within the instrumentation, at least the string players in your family, you do have a built-in string quartet. Have you done over the past years a lot of chamber music playing as a family?
Not just as a family, but parts of the family. For instance, this past summer, Blythe and I were part of a string quartet. Also, we played as a quintet at in Colorado at Central City on a chamber music festival.
I see.
With some members of the Cleveland Orchestra. So in that way, sometimes 2 or 3 of us will perform together.
I bet that's a joy for your family to have that connection to bring you back together and such.
Well, it certainly is.
Yeah, yeah. Over the years, in all of the performing that you have done as individuals or family in large settings like orchestra or in smaller settings, I would imagine that you have come in touch with some of the big names in music, in performance. Are there some particular situations that you remember, especially names that our students in music appreciation classes might recognize?
Well, of course, let's see. When I was a member of the Denver Symphony, I played 2 big concerts with Igor Stravinsky.
Wow.
One of them had his son, Suleyman, as piano soloist.
Is that right?
Yes.
So Igor, the conductor, was the composer, but his son was the pianist then for the piano concerto? Interesting.
And, all the music on those concerts were Stravinsky's own music,
Sure.
of course. Then I remember Morton Gould conducting, and Andrei Kostelanetz, and conductor Leopold Stokowski came from Philadelphia.
Wow.
Later, I went to Tanglewood. In the summer I was there, Leonard Bernstein was also at Tanglewood as a protege of Koussevitzky. And he was the conductor for Peter Grimes, Benjamin Britten's, which was the first American performance, and I played that.
Of Britten's opera.
Yeah,
yes.
Britten's opera.
Yeah, okay.
And let me see. Oh yes, and at Central City, which is a place where in Colorado, an old mining town, where every summer very good opera is produced in a very small opera hall built by the miners 100 years ago. And one summer we did the premiere of the Ballad of Baby Doe, Douglas Moore.
By American composer.
American
yes.
composer, whose name, that opera is often mentioned in music appreciation books.
Textbooks, sure.
Yes.
Yeah, okay. And I believe you mentioned that your husband had a familiarity with Jascha Heifetz, violinist,
Oh yes,
as well?
they were friends. Jascha Heifetz spent a weekend in Phoenix with my husband one time, and
Is that right?
yes.
Yeah.
And my husband wrote some music for him, dedicated it to Heifetz, and was always trying to emulate his speed.
Yeah.
He's a very fast player.
Oh, I bet. Yeah, that's interesting. I'm curious, since you have had some personal contact or professional contact with some of these big names that we see in our textbooks, do you notice at all a difference in your personal response to the person, Stravinsky, as opposed to what is written about in textbooks? Do you think that our authors do try to paint an accurate picture, or did you see something from a more personal point of view that you wish would be gotten across better in texts or such?
Oh, of course, I'm always reminded of my experiences when I play their music today. And I remember the person, I remember the people, how they sounded, how Stravinsky conducted with a small beat and with an eyes that saw everything and heard everything. He had very accurate ears.
Is that right?
I remember things, I suppose, more about their personages than anything.
Yeah.
I suppose if I thought about that, I could remember some more, some other things.
Yeah. In all of the types of performing that are possible with violin, what do you enjoy most from your own point of view as a performer?
I think I enjoy playing chamber music. I was a member of the Ars Musica String Quartet at Ball State for many years. In fact, all the years I was there.
And that was a faculty string quartet?
Yes. And of course it changed from year to year it would change personnel,
Sure.
but I was there. I was the one person who always,
You were the link. Yeah. Yeah.
always was a member for, I suppose, 35, 40 years. And that's the kind of music I most enjoy when I have the opportunity.
Why do you think you have that preference for chamber
Well,
music?
because it's very satisfying. It's the most satisfying. I think if you are a chamber music player, you understand that, because it's you're a part of a small group. You have your own part to play, and it's a joint performance with other people, and it's a conversation with other musicians in a musical sense. And it doesn't have the demands of solo playing, say getting out in front of an orchestra and playing a concerto. And of course that is another kind of career altogether. One doesn't have that opportunity.
Sure.
Or one doesn't have that ability. Not many people have that ability to concertize as soloists there.
Absolutely. Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
and I'm a rather retiring person. I think it has a great deal to do with one's personality.
That's
One's
probably
one's
true.
temperament.
Sure.
Some people like to show what they can do technically, and but I'd rather just be a part of the group,
Yeah. Part of the conversation, as you said.
part of the
Yeah.
conversation, but still have my own individuality.
Sure. Yeah, well, that's very interesting. Well, as we're getting ready to close our conversation, we're also getting ready to close this century, and I'm curious what you might think, looking past over your past career and experiences that you have had in music. What are your thoughts about the world of classical music here near the end of the 20th century?
My goodness.
It's a big question.
It certainly is. Well, I will say, and we know, that the music is an art, or the art form is certainly inviolate. But the music business certainly isn't. And it's in a risky situation now. We have a risky situation in that so many of our musical organizations are not being well supported, either by the government. The National Endowment for the Arts has withdrawn so much of its support from our organizations, or privately by corporations, and even some of our most eminent symphonies are having financial problems.
Yeah, indeed.
And so I don't know. I think we'll always have, of course, it will have classical music. It will persist on and on, of course.
Sure.
But I don't know. Right now, it's a shaky business. Unlike Europe, where the arts are supported.
More strongly, from a national point of view.
Absolutely, by the government. Every small town has an opera house or a small chamber orchestra, and they're well supported. Even teachers are well supported by the government.
Yeah,
In
a very
Germany,
different situation.
In Germany, very different.
Yeah. Okay. Well, I believe you mentioned also that you do have a young grandson. He's a little bit too little yet to know, but I suspect that the Treticks will start yet another generation of musicians.
He's being surfeited. Alexei is his name. He's been surfeited with music from all directions. And that, of course, I think is the background for a musical family, is the
exposure, having contact.
The exposure and the contact, the kinds of music that we heard and he hears now with a mother who is a professional.
Yeah, absolutely. You mentioned at the ripe old age of 3, he's singing portions of Mozart's opera Magic Flute.
Oh, yes,
and
yes.
such. So I think he's on his way. So, okay, well, thank you very much for taking time to visit with me and to tell us about your background and the lives and careers of your children.
I enjoyed very much talking to you, Linda.
Great, thanks.